Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is Ahmed Mohamed. I'm the legal director at CAIR New York, the Council on American Islamic Relations, the New York chapter. Today, we have two special guests with us from the CCRB, the Civilian Complaint Review Board. We're going to speak to us about the new changes at CCRB and what that means for New Yorkers, and today specifically for the Muslim community. We're joined by CCRB's executive director and the Racial Profiling and Bias Policing Investigations Unit head as well. And so I want to take this opportunity to hand over the mic to both of you, John and Darius, to kind of introduce CCRB to the Muslim community and introduce yourselves and kind of what this Racial Profiling and Bias Policing Investigations Unit looks like. I think that's kind of a new twist to CCRB.
So first, thank you so much for having us on your show. My name's John Darche. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the executive director of the CCRB. And appearing with me today is
Darius Charney. I also use he, him as pronouns, and I am the director of the very new Racial Profiling and Bias-Based Policing Investigations Unit of the CCRB.
And the CCRB stands for the Civilian Complaint Review Board, and we are an independent city agency, all civilian city agency that investigates, mediates, and prosecutes allegations of police misconduct by members of the NYPD against civilians in this city. We're very excited to be here talking to you today to discuss a new change to the CCRB's jurisdiction, because we are now investigating claims of allegations of racial profiling and bias-based policing. And we've designed a whole new unit led by Darius to investigate these cases. So we're excited to be here and explain what we're doing and how we do it to you and your audience.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. We know the importance of CCRB and having an independent body, to investigate racial and bias profiling issues at the NYPD. I know at CAIR New York and in the Muslim community in the past, we have had, racial profiling and bias complaints that we've submitted to CCRB. Generally, they've gone back to the NYPD's internal audit unit. And I think that most of us are all aware that 99.9% of those investigations don't find any wrongdoing, regardless of what the officer may have done. So it's glad to see that expansion happened. Darius, can you take us through what this unit is and how it's going to work moving forward? And maybe in that process, it would help if maybe outlining how individuals can report like bias and racial profiling issues.
Sure. So as Ahmed mentioned, historically, CCRB has not had the power to investigate complaints about bias policing. So what would happen before now is if a member of the public came to the CCRB and alleged that an officer had either racially profiled them or mistreated them in some other way based on one of their other identity traits, whether that was gender, religion, age, disability, sexual orientation, so forth. If they brought that complaint to the CCRB, we would have to refer that over to the Internal Affairs Bureau at the NYPD to investigate themselves. And as Ahmed mentioned, 99.999% of the time, they did not substantiate those allegations. I think the statistic that I've seen most recently earlier this year was, in the past 7 years, they had over 3,400 profiling or bias allegations that were investigated by IAB, and they substantiated a total of 4. So I guess that's about 1/10%. Last year, the city council decided, I think probably in my view, is a long overdue decision to change that system by amending the city charter to clarify. I didn't even say to add, but to clarify, just because I guess there was confusion that actually CCRB does have jurisdiction to investigate racial profiling and other forms of bias policing under its abuse of authority jurisdiction. We have the city charter gives us jurisdiction over 4 different kinds of misconduct, one of which is abuse of authority. And the city council said, well, racial profiling and bias policing are a form of abuse of authority, which I think everybody probably understands. That makes sense. So we now have that jurisdiction. I was hired to create a new unit at the CCRB to investigate those cases because CCRB has never done that before. So we have a team now that includes myself. We have a deputy director. We have 2, call them squads here, of investigators and investigating attorneys who will actually be investigating the cases that are filed with the CCRB. And we will treat any complaint of bias policing just as we do any other misconduct complaint that we investigate. We will investigate it. We will make a determination. There are 4 different determinations that we could make in a case. One is to substantiate it, which means we did find by a preponderance of the evidence that the officer committed the misconduct alleged. We can unfound it, which means that we've determined that the incident or the conduct did not occur. We can, I guess we're not using the word exonerate anymore, but we can find that
conduct is within guidelines.
Yes, we can find that the officer did commit the conduct alleged, but that conduct was within departmental guidelines. Or the 4th one is that we just were unable to determine one way or the other whether or not the misconduct occurred. So for bias policing, just like with any other misconduct complaint that we investigate, we will be able to investigate it, and we make a finding that's made by a panel of board members who vote. If we do substantiate it, we can recommend disciplinary penalties for the officer. And in certain cases where if the disciplinary penalty that's recommended is what's called disciplinary charges, which are the most serious, the CCRB, and I believe we're the only civilian oversight agency in the country that has this power, but we will actually prosecute those disciplinary cases in a departmental trial in the NYPD. We prosecute them ourselves. Most other oversight agencies don't have that power. That usually the prosecution happens within the police department where the officer works. We have the ability to prosecute it. So, that is, I say all that to say that, we are going to take these cases very seriously. We're going to investigate them thoroughly. And if and when we do find that bias policing occurred, we are going to recommend discipline and in certain situations, prosecute those disciplinary charges in a departmental trial.
Can I add a couple of things? So first of all, I think while it is appropriate to give a lot of credit and praise to the city council for changing the charter, I also think we need to acknowledge that without the advocacy of people like the members of CAIR and other groups that you work with, I don't think there would have been the political will in the council to make this change. And so this is not something that's being done that we're telling you about. We're letting you know the results of your activism. And so I think it's important that the people who are watching this understand that you have a stake in this, that this is part of something that you work for. And don't view it as something that we don't view it as that we are giving you something. We are viewing it as like you have given us a charge and we are taking it seriously, and we are going to move forward with the responsibility that you've given us. And so that's one thing I wanted to make sure. And Darius, were you about to tell them how to file a complaint? Because I think that
I was going to get to that. I just wanted to say one more thing about our jurisdiction. So our jurisdiction is pretty broad. And the reason for that is that the bias policing statute in New York City, which to John's point was really the product of an incredible amount of organizing and advocacy by groups like CAIR over many years to get that passed back in 2013. But it is one of, if not the broadest, anti-bias policing statutes in the country. It, prohibits bias policing not only on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, but gender, religion, age, disability, immigration status, and housing status, and sexual orientation as well. So, it's not just racial profiling that, we are going to be looking into. It's anytime an officer engages in bias policing based on any of those identity traits that I listed, we have jurisdiction to investigate those cases. And in terms of filing a complaint, there are many ways you can do it. You can pick up the phone, call 311 and be connected to CCRB and speak with a staff member who can, take the statement and get the process rolling. You can file a complaint online at our website. There's a link to do so. You can, if you happen to be downtown Manhattan, you can walk into the CCRB and meet with an investigator and give a statement and then make a complaint that way. And the other thing, and I've been telling this to a lot of groups like CAIR that work, directly with the most impacted communities. For bias policing, the other thing is we want to hear about these individual cases, but we also want to start to get a sense of what are the kind of problems and the patterns of behavior, maybe the particular precincts in the city that are very problematic when it comes to bias policing. So I'm also happy, and I'll put my email in the chat to, talk to anybody about whether it's one particular case or a series of cases that have come out of maybe a particular part of the city, before you even go ahead and file, just so, we can be aware of what's going on. Am I leaving out any methods for filing complaints, John, or?
No, I just shared the link in the chat, and you could just call 311.
Yeah, exactly.
Hold on. So 311, just say CCRB and they'll connect you to CCRB.
So
that's what I'm.
They may take your information and then forward it to us, but they'll make sure it gets to us.
Okay. All right. That's good. And we'll post the how you can get in touch with CCRB to file a complaint or report an issue, or maybe just to talk to Darius as he suggested. We won't blast your email though. Don't worry.
It's fine. I give it to
information out
there because I know you guys will reach out if you have something important to talk about. So
yeah, well, good. There's a couple of things I wanted to kind of follow up with you.
Yes.
And John, thank you so much for mentioning that to people, that the expansion of this jurisdiction was a people-powered movement, and so we're so glad to have that clarification through through this process. But so when individuals are calling out to CCRB, from our community, a lot of immigrants, a lot of folks who may not speak English, or English may be their second language. When they are calling CCRB, can they expect to be speaking to someone, one, that's culturally competent, and then two, is there language access capabilities at CCRB that they can use to communicate with your staff?
So there is language access that we have, so that we can get interpreters and translators, so that we can make sure that there are clear communication between the people who call us and ourselves, so that we make sure that we explain what we do to folks, but also understand what they're saying happened. And to be blunt, my staff should be culturally competent, but if there are issues, please reach out to me, because just the way police officers commit misconduct, it's possible for a CCRB investigator to not do the right thing, and I would want to hear about that when that happens. So I will share my email as well, and people can feel free to.
That's great.
You can find 99% of the people at CCRB's email from these two.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. And it's good because, it's really important, because we do get sometimes, not particularly with CCRB, but we hear it all over the city. For example, we've seen past instances where, investigations by the NYPD happen and the individual either doesn't know what's going on, or they weren't communicated with in a language that they understood. And so it's important that they're calling your office, they're able to, be able to have an interpreter so they could, submit their complaint and kind of have their matter investigated properly. What I do want to get to, oh, go ahead.
And we're working to make sure that our outreach materials are available in many languages, which is required by law, by city law, but it's something that we in the past have failed to meet for budgetary reasons. But we are working to get that done and expect to have it done by early in 2023, so that it's not on the person to get things interpreted, but there are things that people can understand in their language.
Right. No, absolutely. That's very important. So two things that Sam brought up and I need to ask about, and I think maybe it's relevant for individuals who feel that maybe they've submitted a complaint in the past, or they thought about submitting a complaint in the past, and maybe saw some news or somebody told them, oh, CCRB doesn't do bias policing investigations, which is that, does CCRB now have the ability to, is there like a look back period where individuals, let's say for the past 5 years, can file a complaint? And second, what about officers who are off duty when they are committing wrongful conduct? Can you discuss that as well?
Can I take the off-duty question?
Yes, you absolutely should, because I'm still unclear of that. I'll do the look back. So that has been I think caused a lot of confusion in the way that the media has talked about it, and frankly, even our board has talked about it. So I'll try to clear it up. I tried to clear it up for the board itself. So what City Council did when it amended the charter is it did two things. The first is what I talked about earlier, which was it clarified that bias policing is a form of abuse of authority, and so the CCRB has jurisdiction to investigate civilian complaints of bias policing that come in. That's one section of the city charter. For those who care, it's section 440C1. The other thing that the city council did is they created this whole new section of the charter, 441. And what 441 talks about is what are called past professional conduct investigations. And I think this is what, Ahmed, you're referring to. Past professional conduct investigations are investigations of officers, I guess current or even in some cases retired officers who have already been found either by us or by some other agency to have committed an act of bias policing. So, maybe the City Human Rights Commission or Department of Justice or DOI, Department of Investigations, had done an investigation of an officer and found that they did commit an act of bias. In those situations, CCRB would then have the jurisdiction to essentially look at that officer's entire job history at the NYPD to see if that one act of bias was part of like a larger pattern of bias conduct. But I think the important thing to emphasize is those cases cannot be initiated by like a civilian filing a complaint. These are only going to happen if there's already been an investigation. Maybe it was because somebody had filed a complaint a few years ago and there was already a finding made. And the 5-year thing is that the act of bias that was found in that prior investigation had to have occurred within the last 5 years. In those cases, CCRB would then have jurisdiction to basically look at this officer's whole, kind of time on the job to see if the one act that they were found to have committed was actually part of a larger pattern. But for the purposes of like members of the public filing complaints with us, we can't go back and look at something that happened 5 years ago. I think that the statute of limitations that we operate under for our civilian complaints investigations is 18 months. In other words, if an incident happened, if an incident happened more than 18 months ago, we would not have the ability under, I guess, state civil service law to actually, or that neither we nor the police department would have the ability to discipline that officer. So for bias policing complaints brought by the public, it really has to be things that have happened very recently for us to investigate.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
The statute of limitations that Darius is describing is in state law. It's civil service law section 75, and it says that cases must be charges must be served on the member of service within 18 months from the date of incident. there's only one exception to that rule, and that is if the conduct that the officer is alleged to have committed could have been charged as a crime. That's the only exception to the 18-month statute of limitations. If you have an incident that you feel you want to make a complaint about and you're not sure, make the complaint, and that's something we can figure out. Like, it shouldn't be on the individual to determine whether or not our jurisdiction applies. Call us, tell us what happened, and we'll look into it and see if we have jurisdiction. And then the question of on-duty or off-duty conduct. For our regular FATO jurisdiction, the officer needs to have been either on duty or invoked their authority as a police officer while they are off duty. So if you have an encounter with an off-duty police officer and he says, back up, I'm a police officer, then he has invoked his authority. There's other things that the officer can do to invoke their authority as well. If you are unsure, file a complaint with the agency, and then we can figure out whether or not we have jurisdiction.
Okay, I think we have about maybe like 5 to 10 minutes left. I want to switch topics here. Well, not switch topics, but switch gears for a second. One specific question first is to kind of go with what you were kind of talking about, John. Maybe if we could expand on it. What we've seen recently over the last couple of years is a lot of exposure of maybe police officers' conduct on social media. And so that means, let's say an officer belongs to a specific group or posts certain images on social media that may raise, like animus towards a particular religious group, like the Muslim community. The public, I guess, in that case, wouldn't know if the officer posted those images on duty, off duty. Would that be something that CCRB is looking to investigate, or is hoping that the public will file complaints about?
So,
or maybe is that within your jurisdiction?
So it is unclear that the incident you described would fall in our jurisdiction. A lot of it, these are the detailed questions to see whether, if it was off duty, the officer invoked their authority. But file the complaint with us. If we can investigate it, we will. And if we have to refer it to a different agency to look at it, even if it's the NYPD, if they make a finding that the officer acted inappropriately with their social media post, even if it is off duty, then that would trigger the Section 441 part of the charter. And then we would have that kind of holistic look at the officer's record that Darius described earlier.
Okay, thank you. And Darius, if maybe, I think there's one component we haven't talked about yet, which is that CCRB can also initiate investigations by itself.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how that can happen? Is it something you see in the news and you start an investigation? And then second, for individuals who want to remain anonymous, is that a possibility for them?
So I'll let John do the anonymous complaint issue, but for self-initiation, yes, that is another new power that we have, meaning that we actually don't have to wait for a civilian to come to us and complain about a particular incident. If we learn of an incident of misconduct that we determine is, sufficiently serious, whether that's in the biased policing area or even another form of misconduct, we have the ability to essentially just launch an investigation ourselves and investigate the incident, determine if the officer committed misconduct, and if necessary, recommend discipline and or prosecute the charges. In terms of how we're going to determine what cases we would self-initiate, I think that's very much still under discussion. We have like a committee of kind of senior leadership that's going to kind of review cases that maybe people want to self-initiate and try to figure out when that would be appropriate. But I don't know, John, if you want to say anything more about that.
So once the committee makes a recommendation, I review it and make a joint determination with the chair about whether we'll self-initiate.
That's good.
And then there was another part.
And anonymous complaints.
So people have the ability to file complaints anonymously, but once we come to you as a witness and try and get your statement, we're going to have, if the case eventually leads to substantiation and administrative charges, we would have to disclose to the department who the witnesses that we obtain statements from, even if we wouldn't disclose who was the person that initiated the investigation.
Okay. I think maybe one last question, and then we'll tell people one more time how they can reach CCRB to file a complaint. So we're talking about really investigating individual conduct. Maybe this is a short answer for one of you, which is, what is there more like larger scale investigations that CCRB can conduct, like with respect to, for example, if individuals feel that there's a profiling policy being in place, and then using like statistical information to figure out whether the NYPD is targeting a specific racial group as opposed to a specific officer engaging in misconduct?
So, I mean, I think the short answer is, our jurisdiction is focused on individual members of service. Now, I think one of the things CCRB has, at least in my experience, because before this, I used to be an advocate, and I worked on cases about discriminatory policies in the NYPD. And what I found very helpful over many years was some of the particularly issue-specific reports that the CCRB puts out, because not only are we investigating these individual cases, but we're also tracking categories of data that I think are really important. Like, for example, where are a lot of these complaints coming from? Is a particular precinct? Is it a particular part of the city? What kinds of misconduct are people complaining about most often? And so we put out reports on issues like policing of the LGBTQ plus community. We're hopefully going to put out a report before the end of the year about how the NYPD responded to a lot of the George Floyd racial justice protests and some of the kind of patterns of really disturbing conduct that we saw in that. And so that is one way that the CCRB, I think, is able to really impact the policy discussion in an important way, because those reports are used by advocates. They can be used by city council to influence legislation, and maybe someday the NYPD will take them seriously and maybe make changes to what they're doing based on what we found. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say for bias policing specifically is, we do have a data scientist that we hired, and she has a lot of experience, doing a lot of really complex statistical analysis around different kinds of inequality, whether that's racial inequality or economic inequality or so forth. And, we intend to use those tools, even in some of our individual cases, particularly if we are able to determine that whatever the bias policing incident that occurred was actually the product of some sort of directive that came from maybe higher up, whether it was a precinct commander or borough commander, because we think that if that's where the issue is really, if that's the source of the issue, source of the bias policing, we do have jurisdiction to go after, uniformed members of service, even if they are higher up. It's more complicated, but if we can actually, trace the incident back to some directive that they gave, we can investigate them. We'll see, but anyway, yeah, John, go ahead.
I know we're running out of time, but the thing to look at in our reports for the question about, NYPD policies is when we find conduct within guidelines, it means that the officers or officer involved in the incident might have done something that we think was inappropriate, but they were following what the NYPD training and procedures were. And so if you find us finding many allegations of profiling to be within guidelines, that's should be a signal for groups that, hey, maybe we need to look and see why this was within guidelines. And again, thanks to work of groups like CAIR and your members, the police secrecy law, the Section 50A of the Civil Rights Law in New York State was repealed. And so now we are making much more information available to the public, not only through the FOIL process, but proactively putting it, we're trying to put it out there so the public can see it and have a true picture of what the CCRB is seeing when it investigates misconduct allegations.
Yeah, that's an excellent point to bring up. Transparency is very important, especially when we're talking about police conduct. One last thing, and then we'll kind of close it out, which is how can individuals who want to help the CCRB, how can they get involved? Are there opportunities, either volunteer or to be part of CCRB?
Well, first of all, we are hiring. So it's, you were asking the question about cultural competency. And one of the things that we are trying to do here at CCRB is hire a diverse staff so that people do feel seen when they come here. And even if the investigator they're speaking with doesn't look like them, they'll at least see other folks who look like them and who sound like them and feel like, well, I will be heard by this entity. And the best way to help us fix that issue so that we can truly resemble the people we're supposed to be representing is to apply to work here. And that some people might think that is better than volunteering because we will pay you and give you benefits. So go to our website and there are links to jobs that are at the NYC jobs portal, and you can go to it and apply to work here. And I think that's one of the best things you can do to help. The other thing is, I'm sure many of the people who are watching this interview are members of other social organizations and religious organizations, and we have an outreach team that will come to your organization and explain to you what the CCRB does and how we do it and how we can be of service to the people in your community, and we'd be happy to do so. And normally I do these not with Darius, but with someone from the outreach team who knows the link to type into the chat. So yeah. I will have Marwa reach out to you guys and make sure you have that and can share it with everyone.
Okay. Yeah, we'll certainly share it. We'll share this on social media, and I think it'll go out on our newsletters as well. We're just really excited about this expansion in the CCRB. We're excited to see Darius, lead this unit, and hopefully, we see some great investigations that come out. And I think that we want to hold individuals who have a lot of power in our city, right? That badge has a lot of power, a lot of responsibility that comes with it. And with that responsibility, there really needs to come accountability, and hopefully that's the role that CCRB will play. And for everybody out there, it's really important. We're always seeing a lack of diversity in agencies. And right now, you heard it from, John, the executive director at CCRB. They have staff openings. Go apply, and create a better agency with you in it. Darius, if you have any last comments, please go ahead, and then we'll close it out.
Sure. I mean, just, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. I feel like, one of my priorities is to continue to build strong relationships with groups like CAIR, because, you all are the ones that are, have your ears to the street, so to speak, in terms of working with those communities most directly impacted by discriminatory policing. And so I think the CCRB is really, I think relies on groups like CAIR to not only tell us what's going on, but to, really educate our staff on how does bias policing actually operate in practice. And so I want to continue to, have these discussions going forward.
Okay, well, we're here to be partners with CCRB And I think if you took one thing away from this conversation, and I think we always say this at CAIR New York to our community, is report, report, report. It's really important. I'll tell you this, today we want you to report to CCRB if you have any issues. That's really important. Go to their website, call 311. If you're not comfortable doing it on your own, or if you want to report to CAIR New York, you can do that as well. We're here as an asset for you, the Muslim community, to help you get the justice and accountability that you deserve. So if you want to report to CAIR New York, you can just go to our website. It's CAIR-NY.org. There's an incident complaint request form. You can call our office, 646-665-7599, or you can, find a way to contact one of our staff members who are in your communities, 24/7. We live in our community. We're part of our community. We're here to serve the community. So once again, thank you so much to CCRB, and thank you so much to everybody. And hopefully that you are contacting CCRB, contacting CAIR New York to report your issues. Report, report, report. Assalamu alaikum.
Have a good day, everyone.
All right.
Take care.